So in this first engagement here, I'm going to be going up against an F-15. Now, the F-15 is going to turn on his jammer at some point in this engagement. And what it does is it prevents me from getting a lock on the F-15, and it also prevents me from building any kind of situational awareness in reference to getting his altitude and his speed as he's getting closer to me. Another danger that this presents is that the F-15 is able to get a lock on me while I cannot get a lock on him. For most new people, this would be a pretty bad situation to be in, simply because you have a bandit that's hot on you, that can see you, that can fire on you, but you do not have the ability to return fire. Now, what I'm going to do is I'll show you what I did to counter this and put the F-15 and I back in an equal position, and how I further leaned the engagement more towards my favor, even though the F-15 still had a speed and altitude advantage, which matters a lot in Fox 1 BVR combat, because the person that has more kinematic energy behind their missiles will obviously get a better percentage of kill against someone who's at a lower altitude and not as fast. So at this point, I realize that the F-15 is getting closer, and I am not any closer to getting a burn through on the bandit. So I put the bandit on my beam or notch, and what this does is it increases the closure rate, or it makes the bandit have to get closer in order to get a lock on me, because I am no longer hot on him. So he has to come in closer to get some kind of solution on me. Another thing that it does is I do know that the bandit was at a higher altitude, so this could cause some issues with the bandit's tracking if I am notching his radar. And now that I see that the bandit's closer, instead of turning hot back towards the bandit, I crank just enough to get a radar lock and assess his altitude and his speed. That way, if he does come hot, I can disappear back to the notch. And the bandit still has a pretty good energy and altitude advantage on me, and in this fight I would be at a disadvantage head on, simply because he just has more altitude and speed. So what I do is I go back into the notch, and I have to end this bandit's track, defeat his radar, so that I can get the advantage by being the first one to shoot. Because BVR comes down to altitude, speed, or whoever sees who first. So now I have to be the first one to see him, and that's what happens here. And once I fire on the bandit is unable to return fire and is put in a defensive situation in which I don't let him return fire, and he's unable to run away, he's unable to go offensive, and the fight is pretty much over. Alright guys, so in this engagement I'm going up against another F-15, and the battle or engagement is pretty much equal. The F-15 has just as much speed as I do and just as much altitude. It doesn't vary too much, and the F-15 is gaining the altitude to make it a bit equal. Now, all things being equal, this is a pretty balanced engagement. We both see each other, we both have good speed, but this is the difference. Instead of being chivalrous and waiting until I am in range to fire my missile, much like the F-15 is probably doing here, which is why he's cranking, I wait until I'm just above max range and I override my missile. Now you may say, well, why would you do that? It's not going to hit. Well, I know the missile will not hit, but it will get a reaction out of the bandit here, almost like I am probing my opponent. Now, I go into a crank and close or reduce my speed, so to reduce my closure rate. Now what does this do? This means the bandit has to fly hot towards my missile in order to get a shot and get closer because I'm not hot on him. Now, with Fox 1 missiles, you don't get a distance like you would with an AMRAAM, so this bandit doesn't really know how close my missile is, how fast it is, or what to do in this situation. So he has no choice but to go cold and get out of the engagement. And I wanted to do that to, instead of notching, to show you how there's just different aspects to Fox 1 BVR, which is why I really do enjoy it so much, because you are handicapped to your missile. So there's so many ways to defeat an opponent. You just kind of have to assess the situation and just determine how you want to go about it. Now, this bandit does come back and I engage him, but the only reason I didn't press is because I noticed there was another bandit behind me. But yes, that is the curveball per se that I threw into this engagement, was being the first person to get off a shot.
Переведи в набор. Переведи в набор. Переведи в набор.
So here I merge with the bandit. I wanted to get a gun to kill at first, but I decided to use 73s because of the unknown bandit in the area, and this guy does a pretty good job of spoofing my 73s, which was interesting to see. But ultimately, due to the defensive maneuvers that the F-15 pulled, it ends up low on energy and it really can't recover. Even though the F-15 has a great thrust, it just cannot recover in this instance and is left floating and gives me a pretty good gun solution. So in this engagement, this is the F-15 that's pretty much in space. I noticed that it does not have a lot of energy. Now, the reason I am not concerned with flying head on is because it simply just doesn't have enough energy to put behind a missile, even though the bandit does have the altitude advantage. I have more speed, and yes, my missile will have to go uphill, but it's not quite something that I am worried about just because of the massive speed difference. I know it also will allow me to get the first shot because I have the higher energy state. Now, the F-15 does return fire. I don't worry about it at first until I start to realize I haven't quite got a splash yet, and this guy's pretty close. So I go into the notch, and I also do that because I see there's another bandit to my left. I go into the notch and I defeat his radar and I defeat his missile. Now, the problem with being so high is your visual is not going to be that great when it comes to looking down. He has a lot of altitude. He's not going to be able to really see that well. And as soon as I notch him, it's pretty much game over because he's not going to be able to find me or have any kind of clue as to where I was prior to the notch because he was maneuvering trying to defeat my missile. So this allows me to come up from underneath him, get off a 27T, and that's pretty much the end of that engagement.
Переведи в набор. Набор.
Alright, so in this engagement, I'm going up against an F-15 that has the speed and altitude advantage, and also the weapons advantage because I do not have any Fox 1s or medium range Fox 1s or Fox 2s. Oh, so wait a minute, I did get 5 kills this game. I forgot about this guy. So this was the bandit that was trailing me earlier. I sneak off 2 R-73s at him, and that's a splash. I was wondering where that 5th kill went. But yeah, so I get this guy over here. Didn't see those R-73s coming, so that's the 4th kill of the engagement. And now I have the 5th bandit on my tail. And I just drag him in close by using the hills and terrain masking. And it makes for a pretty interesting engagement because you'll see what happens once we merge.
Переведи в набор. 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 Переведи в
So instead of
набор.
completing my turn and cresting the hill, I actually turn back
Переведи в набор.
the way in which I came because I want the F-15 to come search for me in these ravines, and I don't want to expose myself, especially when I'm slow. Now, I prepare for the merge by going in full burner and getting my speed up because we're low in these hills. It's going to be hard to gain energy, so you want to have energy before the fight starts. You don't want to try and get it in the middle of the fight, and you'll see why that pays off in just a sec.
Атаки. Переведи в набор. Предельный угол атаки.
So
Переведи в
here
набор.
the F-15
Предельный угол
comes
атаки.
in,
Переведи в
and
набор.
bam, there he is. Now I go straight into the vertical. I know the F-15 just pulled a hard turn. He's gonna have to put his nose on me to get a shot off, and that's gonna be pretty hard to gain a lot of energy, especially when you're that low, not a lot of airflow, and you're in the hills. So I have just enough energy. I'm dumping all my flares, and we're going back to the World War II style of play here. I'm making him pull his nose up to get a firing solution that I know he can't get. He's going to run out of energy at the top of his pool, and he's going to stall out. Now all I have to do is just wait for him to drop that nose, and I have just enough energy to ink out over the top and transition to a 6. And all that was made possible simply because I knew I would need the energy before the fight started. So I got it, and it helped.
Переведи в набор. Переведи в набор. Переведи в набор. Переведи в набор.
Thanks for watching, guys. I appreciate it, and I hope you enjoyed the video.
Fort 5-1, taxi to parking area.